How to fight woke corporations. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And look, here in America, we've headed down this dangerous path where we have allowed corporations, businesses, free market enterprises to dictate to American citizens how they should behave, how they should act, how they should speak or not speak, even sometimes how they should think. Is that American? What do corporations know about the Constitution that American citizens don't? When we put the businesses of America in charge of dictating to us things like the First Amendment, that's dangerous. Those are dangerous times for America. And this is what we're facing right now with the woke corporations. And many of us are wondering, how do we fight back against this, though? How do we fight a business structure that has come into being in America where it seems everywhere you look, every business you try to frequent, every establishment you try to shop, somewhere along the line, in their new business structure, they have implemented policies that seem more in line with what Black Lives Matter wants put out there. It just seems very anti-American what's taken over our free market. And if you're like most patriotic citizens, you don't want to put your money into businesses that support causes that you completely disagree with or outright oppose. And if you're like most Americans, you're tired of being lectured by business entities, by left-leaning CEOs, or worse, by cowardly business executives who bend to the loudest voices in America, which somehow, coincidentally, always seem to lean left. What happened to the good old days where you could just go to the store and buy something, and the transaction was all about giving money for a product or service that you receive in return, and that was it? There weren't all these concerns about whether the business was environmentally friendly, doing its environmental justice role, doing its Black Lives Matter activism. There wasn't all this transgender policy pushing businesses to open dressing rooms to both sexes. There wasn't all this transgender policy pushing businesses to recognize the ridiculous idea that there are more than two sexes. So what do you do? What do you do when your favorite business goes woke, right? How do you fight that? I mean, you have to shop somewhere. Well, before I offer a couple of solutions, let me just mention that Bold and Blunt is not only available at WashingtonTimes.com, but it's also available at Edify, edify.app/podcasts. And this is the platform for faith-based podcasts. If you're someone in America who is looking to go beyond the politics, beyond the culture, and look at what's taking place today in America, or in the world for that matter, through a faith-based perspective, through a biblical perspective, Edify is the place to go. And I'm happy to say that Bold and Blunt is now part of Edify's regular lineup. So please go there, check it out. And of course, you can always access and download Bold and Blunt any place that you get your podcasts. And certainly, Bold and Blunt is not part of the woke corporate culture. Pretty much speak our minds here at Bold and Blunt. Get woke, go broke. Republican calls for punishing woke businesses with legislation grow. That's a recent Forbes headline, a paraphrase of a recent Forbes headline. And let me read from the opening of the story. Senator Marco Rubio, Republican, Florida, of course, became the latest Republican lawmaker to advocate legislative sanctions against businesses perceived as too woke or politically left-wing. And apparently this has become an increasingly popular position among Republicans in Congress, the Forbes article goes on to say. Why? Well, Rubio has been on this ride for a while now. In a recent New York Post opinion piece, he actually accused corporate America of, quote, flexing its power to humiliate politicians if they dare support traditional values. Senator Rick Scott, also from Florida, wrote a letter to woke corporate America around the same time as Rubio wrote this in the New York Post. And in Scott's piece, he warned of a, quote, day of reckoning if Republicans take back Congress in 2022. He vowed to make corporate welfare a thing of the past. Well, that's a good idea. Corporations really have no business accepting tax dollars in order to operate. I'm not a big fan of corporate welfare. I'm not a big fan of the whole Republican messaging that some businesses are too big to fail. And that's why we need to siphon tax dollars into these private enterprises. Not a big fan of that. If you're a private business, you ought to stay private. And if you can't achieve success in the private sector and your business is failing, well, you go out of business because you failed to achieve success in the free market. That's how the free market works. There are actual winners and losers. And when the free market is actually left free to operate as it's supposed to, it's the consumers who decide. When the government starts tinkering and picking winners and losers, that's when the free market crumbles. And what happens is that's when certain businesses start to cry foul that they're being disadvantaged by government tinkering, and so they want part of the government dole-outs in order to level the playing field. Well, the playing field in a free market is supposed to be the consumers pick and choose. And once you stray from that idea, once you stray from that ideal, what happens is when government comes in, it upsets the balance. It takes consumers out of the picture of deciding and allows government to pick and choose who succeeds, who fails. And so then the cycle, though, is that certain businesses see that government starts to come in and become the pickers and choosers of winners and losers, and certain businesses want to play the game in order to achieve wins. So they start campaigning for corporate welfare. They start campaigning for certain tax breaks. They start advocating that government does indeed have a right to be in the private sector to level the playing field. And so you get on this cycle where government comes in and tinkers with the free market. It creates a problem and imbalance in the free market, removing consumers from being the final deciders. And then businesses start to turn to government for permission, for opportunity to actually succeed in the private sector, which isn't really so private anymore. And so what happens is you create this system where private businesses start to rely on government to operate successfully. And government, of course, being government, loves that idea because government then has a little control over these businesses, a little control over the private sector. So corporate welfare at its root is pretty evil because what it does is darken the free market system. It clouds the free market system. I'm in favor of Congress not granting corporate welfare. But where I deviate a little bit here with this idea of woke corporatism coming under Congress's eyes is where Rubio talks about basically, and Rick Scott talk about basically taking revenge on businesses for daring to go woke. Because now what you have, if you put Congress in charge of deciding what businesses are actually going woke versus just reaching out to certain segments of the consumer base, then that puts government even more in charge of the free market. So I'm not so sure I'm in favor of Congress coming in and legislating away the power, the ability, the choice, the freedom of corporate America to go woke if corporate America so chooses. That doesn't take away the problem that corporate America is going woke, though, and making patriotic American citizens' lives miserable. Because not only do we have to listen to righteously indignant politicians on the left preaching about the evils and unfairness of the free market system, not only do we have to listen to Republicans talk about businesses being too big to fail, so we have to take tax dollars to support these businesses, but now we have to listen to corporate executives preach to the American public how the American public is oh so wrong, and how the American public is oh so racist, and how the American public is oh so anti-environment, and how the American public is blah, 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 as Greta Thunberg would say.
This is not about some expensive, politically correct green act of bunny hugging or blah, blah, blah. Build back better, blah, blah, blah. Green economy, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah.
Blah, blah, blah. That's enough of that. There have to be some sort of solutions where American citizens can take back the power of consumerism, can take back the power of capitalism. And without government's assistance, without Congress regulating corporations and making the free market even more unfree, there has to be some way that American citizens can actually take back the control and demand that corporations stop preaching silly leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist principles to the American society that actually buoyed these businesses in the first place and allowed them to succeed through the free market. And my guest today, Bill Flaig, he is with the American Conservative Values ETF. And he has an idea in how you, as an American patriot, can put your money into causes that you actually support instead of putting your money into businesses that are working against all that you care about. Bill Flaig, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Cheryl.
You are a co-founder of the American Conservative Values ETF. Tell me what that is.
Yes, it's an investment vehicle, an exchange-traded fund for people who are politically conservative. There's nothing that really exists for politically conservative investors, and in the investment industry, we've seen proliferation of ESG funds over the last 5 years, which is environment, social concerns, and governance. And most of those funds tend to be progressive in nature, and there's no counterbalance for politically conservative individuals to invest in.
So you're kind of the answer to the woke companies of Nike, Coca-Cola, even PepsiCo, and so forth, yes?
Yes, we try to behave like the S&P 500, which is a large cap index that a very significant amount of investment is benchmarked to. But we try to deliver that performance while also avoiding the companies that are most hostile to conservative values, and wokeness is an element of that.
Okay, for people who maybe aren't as financially savvy as you, explain how an exchange-traded fund actually works.
Sure. It is a mutual fund, and I think the place most people come in contact with a mutual fund might be in their IRA or 401k. And an exchange-traded fund is, in the last 20 years, these have come out, and it's basically a mutual fund that trades on a stock exchange, and you can buy or sell it during the day, as opposed to a mutual fund where you can only put money in and out at that day's NAV.
Okay, so the American Conservative Values ETF started in what year, and what was sort of the genesis, the idea, the discussions that took place to bring this to fruition?
Yes, we are still relatively young. Our 1-year anniversary will actually be at the end of this month.
Wow.
And we're very pleased with the performance, and you know, that we've delivered since launching. And I'd say the genesis goes back some time. Myself and my partner Tom Carter, we both have over 25 years of experience in the mutual fund and ETF business. And you know, as I mentioned earlier, we've kind of become frustrated as companies, you know, seem to pander to the left or have moved left happily, and we sensed a business opportunity to launch a product that counterbalances this, as well as being at the point in our careers where we can do something that we like to do, and we are both obviously politically conservative. So it was kind of a very opportune time to do something we are excited to do and hopefully exploit a marketplace opportunity.
So what kind of companies do you guys select?
We start with the S&P 500, and then from that boycott as many companies as we can that are hostile to conservative values, while still also being able to deliver the performance. As part of our research, before we launched the product, we talked to conservatives, and I'd say about 85% of them liked the idea of advocacy, cared about the companies they were invested in, but didn't want to sacrifice performance. And maybe 15% wanted to invest in a fund that was ideologically pure, only conservative companies, if we could find some. Certainly can't find many in the large cap space. And they didn't care about performance. And, you know, as I said earlier, I've been around the block for a while in this industry, and I don't really find too many people who don't care about performance, even if they say they don't. So we designed the fund really to be diversified, have exposure to all the economic sectors, both growth and value, behave like the S&P 500, but avoid as many of the liberal companies as we can. As I said, right now we're boycotting 27 large cap companies, which represent about 27% of the S&P 500.
Wow.
So for somebody who's invested in, you know, has a large cap mutual fund or ETF index fund, about 27 cents of every dollar they have invested in that is in companies that we avoid.
Here I am, a patriotic American, sick and tired of being chastised by private corporations to go along with things that I don't believe in, to go along with, you know, Black Lives Matter type of protests and so forth. And I want to put my money elsewhere. What steps do I take that lead me to you?
Yes, the process is you know, simple in a certain sense. Any brokerage account has the ability to purchase our funds just like a stock, just like Apple, which we shouldn't be buying, or Google, which we shouldn't be buying. You can buy the American Conservative Values ETF. The ticker symbol is ACVF. So we can be purchased in any brokerage account. Some of the larger brokerage firms, like, you know, Wells Fargo or Merrill Lynch, for instance, they still have barriers for people who have accounts there to buy our fund. But in most of the you know, retail brokerage accounts, you know, E-Trade, Ameritrade, Schwab's, Fidelity, the fund is available.
Why the barriers? Why does Merrill Lynch have a barrier?
Yeah, well, in you know, a lot of ways, you know, they want to, you know, do what's best for their business and maximize their revenue. And one of the things that they want is they really only want larger funds to be on their platform. So we're still just a little too young and a little small. It's nothing nefarious.
Okay. It's sort of an odd thing, not just to me, but I'm sure to a lot of conservatives out there, that The corporate world in general used to be dominated by conservative types, free market types. And now it seems that that is flipping, and the far leftist influences are taking over these corporations and pushing far leftist agendas that truly are anti-America, or at the very least anti-capitalistic at root. What is going on? Where do you see this coming from? Where do you see it leading? What's your response to this?
Well, it is certainly troublesome. No doubt about that. Yeah, and if you go back a long time, Eisenhower, Republicans, conservatives at that point were business, super pro-business, and we've moved away from a corporate environment that's focused on shareholder value, doing the best for the shareholders of the companies, and is focused more on stakeholder value, which is more somewhat ill-defined and broader, but could potentially include the environment, employees, beyond maximizing the return for shareholders. And that's something that we find troublesome and don't believe is worthy of giving those companies your hard-earned investment dollars. I'd say it's been going on for a while, and it's been slow, and it's ultimately because conservatives we're not as organized or as vocal as the left. Certainly, I'd say we have a silent majority, and that phrase goes back a ways. Every now and then we'll get upset over a particular corporate event, and anger will flash, so to speak. But we're not organized and taking a concerted approach. We're not using our voices and our money to change this behavior. And the companies are ultimately responding to pressure that is being applied from the left. And I'd say the majority of companies are not truly sympathetic to the liberal agenda, but they find it easier to just pander to it, greenwash, appear to be green and progressive, even if they are not, and even if their leadership is not, just because it's the path of least resistance, whereas the conservatives are not putting pressure on them. And then there are certainly companies who part of their value proposition is their liberalness, so to speak. So, that would be like a Starbucks or a Nike that you mentioned earlier. I mean, they're liberal and proud of it, and at least there's some honesty there.
Right.
But I think we need to acknowledge that and not support them. So ultimately boycotting their products and not investing in them, I think, are tools that are available to us as well as just being more vocal in our opposition.
You make a good point about the companies that at least are honest in their liberal bent, right? Because the other companies, the ones that go along to get along, ultimately they're leading America down a path that's going to destroy the very capitalistic system that granted them success in the first place. They're sort of eating their own. Yes.
And it doesn't. It's just a very short-term orientation, and I doubt
Yes.
doing it a deep philosophical thought. But you're absolutely right. They're undoing. And I made this argument a while ago when big tech early this year was kind of ganging up against Parler and doing their suppression of conservative voices, which has kind of become so common. It's lost its ability to shock, but it is pretty shocking. So the people who run these companies have become fabulously wealthy based on the success of these companies, and they are basically turning their back on the capitalism that gave them the ability to acquire that fabulous wealth. So to your point, you can see it in the leaders of these companies who are super successful because of capitalism and now have no use for it in a certain sense.
Yeah, it's very wicked in my eyes. You take advantage of something and then you turn tail and fight so others can't take advantage of the same system that allowed you such great success. So looking at what you guys are doing at American Conservative Value ETF, or Values ETF, how confident are you that your operational approach here is going to actually make a dent in this system of anti-capitalism that we're facing in this country right now?
Yes, that's a great question, and it is a baby step. I mean, ultimately, what we hope to do in the near future is just give conservatives something that they can feel good about owning. A step in the right direction, I kind of jokingly say. So right now, I'd say our focus is really on just the conscience of conservative investors giving something they can feel good about. As I said, actually changing the marketplace dynamic will take more time, will take more advocacy. Ultimately, the top 10 ETFs in the United States, this number's a little stale, $800 billion worth of money is invested in them. If 48% of those are politically conservative people, or half, whatever you want to say, that is a huge marketplace opportunity for ourselves and for other companies. So I think our success will draw frenemies, if you will, right. into the investment realm as well, and then we'll have more voices in this battle. But in the near term, I don't suspect that we will move the needle. We almost look forward to the time that either the liberal press or a liberal company kind of calls us out or takes us on as showing progress along that path. But that will be a long journey.
Great change always starts with small steps. So it may be a baby step, but it's a very crucial option to give American patriots at this point in time. And I commend you guys for starting this. The American Conservative Values ETF. What's your website, Bill?
It's acvetfs.com.
Okay. Well, thank you for the work you're doing. And I'm going to be watching you closely, and hopefully you can come back on in a few months and give an update.
Yes, Cheryl, thank you. Thank you for your support and encouragement, and I look forward to giving you that update.
Want to avoid woke companies? There's one solution. And yes, it's not an overnight solution, but sometimes things happen slowly. Sometimes the wheels of freedom churn slowly. But that doesn't make it any less important to fight for those principles of freedom. So companies like this that take a chance, that just against all odds dive in based on principle, based on love of individual liberty, love of America, love of the Constitution, love of the free market. Shouldn't we support them? I think so. Thank you for listening. I want to remind you, you can get Bold and Blunt wherever you get your podcasts, but also at WashingtonTimes.com and at edify.app/podcast. Check out all the faith-based podcasts that Edify has to offer. And if you're already a subscriber, if you are already a regular Bold and Blunt listener, let me just say thank you. Thank you for supporting Bold and Blunt. I truly do appreciate my regular listeners. Tune in next time, and in the meanwhile, stay blunt.